Hello, good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to AHEAD's WAMinar on unlocking accessible communication. So we're just still letting kind of some attendees come in today, but I'll just kind of stop my share here for a minute. So I suppose just kind of welcome everyone back. It's been about 6 months, I think, since our last WAMinar. For those that don't know who I am, I'm Carolyn McGrotty and I'm the Employment Manager with AHEAD. So I hope you haven't missed us too much in the last 6 months. We've been very much busy in the background, kind of doing placements and recruitment and all that kind of way. So we're very excited to have our first webinar in this year's funding round. So welcome to anyone who's new and who hasn't joined us before. I'm just going to kind of take you through some of the features that we have here today. So we do have closed captions available. So it should appear like a live transcript or a CC button at the bottom of your screen. So if you do want to watch captions as well as listen to the webinar, please select the CC button on your screen. I do have my colleague Jade Dyer, and she's a WAM project officer with AHEAD, and she's going to be sharing a few links in this chat and kind of answering some of your technical questions. So I see Jade's already on the ball here, and we're actually, this is my first webinar that I'm doing from the AHEAD offices, and so I have a very different background, and we're actually in the same room here today. So it's a new experience for us, kind of doing it in person but remote as well. We do have a Q&A feature that's specifically for webinars. So if you do have a question for today's webinar, please do try and use that feature because it's a lot easier for us to keep track of questions. In terms of chatting with other attendees, you are welcome to use that functionality as well. Just be mindful it does interfere with your screen reader. So if you do have a screen reader or text-to-speech software, just kind of make sure those settings are turned off because it might interrupt you all the time. But please do feel free to chat to other attendees there. And as always, our hashtag is hashtag WAMinar. So it's not webinar, it's WAMinar. So please do, if you're on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, please do use our hashtag to kind of share information about the event. And just a reminder, we'll have slides and links and a survey sent to all attendees after the webinar. It is also going to be recorded, and so we will have that available on our YouTube channel at a later date once we have the captions organized for that as well. We actually have over 200 people registered for today's session, which is, I didn't think if we were going to get a big audience because, you know, we're obviously with COVID now, kind of not almost over, but, you know, people are getting back to in-person events. I suppose I was a little bit unsure whether there was still an appetite for, I suppose, webinars, but we have over 220 people registered for today's webinar, which is absolutely fantastic. And I can definitely see over 120 are here live watching it. Some people registered to watch the recording afterwards. But I suppose just to get a sense of who's in the virtual room here today, I'm going to ask Jade if she can actually launch a poll for us. So Jade, would you mind launching that? So if you are watching through a browser or if you're dialing in, you may not be able to see the poll, but I'm just going to read out some of the questions that are on the poll. So it's please select the option most appropriate to you. So you work in HR, you're the designated disability or access office, you're a hiring manager, you're a line manager, a regular employee, or I don't meet any of the above. And then what sector do you work in? So private sector, public sector, or semi-state, higher education, further ed, NGO and not-for-profit or other, if you don't kind of fit into any of those categories. This is important for us because we want to get an understanding of who's in the room here today. But while that poll is still kind of going on, so there'll probably be a pop-up notification on the front of your screen, I just might tell you a little bit about AHEAD and WAM for those that maybe don't know who we are or what we do. So AHEAD is an organisation that works to create inclusive environments in education and employment for people with disabilities. We were actually set up way back in 1988, and the WAM programme, or as we call it WAM for short, was established in 2005, and we're currently funded by the Department of Social Protection. So what we do is we work with employers to provide paid ring-fence roles for graduates with disabilities, and a lot of those roles have to be a minimum of 6 months, but some of them are even longer. We placed over 600 graduates to date, and 80% of our graduates secure full-time work as a direct result of their internship or their WAM placement upon completion. So that's just a very brief summary of kind of AHEAD and WAM. There's a lot more information on our website. Most of you will be familiar with our work, but please do get in touch if you require further information. So Jade, I might get you to end that poll there now, and if you want to launch the results. Oh, wow. So we have 46% people saying they work in HR, 9% said they are the disability or access officer lead, 4% hiring manager, 5% said line manager, 26% of you are kind of just here as regular employees, and 11% don't meet any of the above. What sector then? So the highest, I suppose, sector that we have here today is public sector and semi-state employer. So that's at 64%. Private employer, we have 20%. Higher education 5%, we have nobody from further ed, not-for-profit NGOs 8% and others 3%. So that's really good. Gives us a really good sense of who's in the room here today or the virtual room. So I might just close that, I might just stop the share there. So I suppose today's WAMinar topic is really looking at recruitment, and it's looking at around accessible communications in recruitment. So this will include things like, your job advertisement, what you're putting up on your social media channels, like is it accessible to people with disabilities? And we are delighted to have two of the heads finest accessibility gurus given this presentation here today. So I might invite our two speakers to just turn on their camera, please, while I introduce you. So we have Leaheen and we also have Jess. So Jessica, or Jess, is our events and communications officer here in AHEAD, and Leaheen is our team support officer here in AHEAD. So we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So please do, if you have a question, just pop it into the chat box. Both Leaheen and Jess will answer them if they can during their presentation or afterwards as well. So, so I might hand over to you guys to share your screen.
Share screen, and fingers crossed. Is that working?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Emil, for that, Leaheen. So I'm delighted to be here with you all today. If we can just click through to the next slide there. Thanks a million. So first thing is the most important message that we can really come away with today is, why is it important to make your communications accessible? According to the 2016 census in Ireland, 1 in 7 people have at least one disability. Now, that's also dependent on people actually disclosing their disability, so that number may be even higher than this. According to AHEAD's most recent report on students with disabilities in higher education, we currently have 17,866 students with disabilities in Irish higher education. That number is based on students registered with their disability support services. So again, the real number may be even higher than that because many students may choose not to disclose for myriad reasons. So that's a huge number of people that are being left out of your communications if we don't make these small changes that myself and Leaheen are going to go through with you today. It also sends the message to those people that they're not welcome, that they're not wanted. So it's really, really important that we do make these small changes that are not so difficult, that will make sure that we include and bring on board as many people as we can. In Ireland, people with disabilities are half as likely to be employed as people without disabilities. So if we don't make sure that our recruitment campaigns and our advertising can actually be accessed by people with disabilities, there's no chance for them to be eligible for those jobs, to put themselves forward if they can't even access the advertising. So really, really important that we do try to make these small adaptations, these small changes to make sure people can access our information. And it benefits everybody. It makes it more accessible for all audiences. So really, really important and good opportunity to do these things. Can we go next slide, please, Leaheen? Perfect. So first things first, I saw that many of you joining today are from the public sector. So we have signed in Ireland the EU Web Accessibility Directive into law as of September 2020. Did get a little bit overshadowed by our small pandemic, so there is still a bit of work to be done in compliance across the sector. But the EU Web Accessibility Directive requires that the websites and apps of public sector bodies meet certain technical accessibility standards. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail here today. AHEAD do have an FAQ both document, a guidance document, and a video with Barrister at Law Katie Ridge. So I think Jade is going to drop the link to that just down there in the chat. That's perfect, Jade. But what I will say is that what the Web Accessibility Directive requires you to have is an accessibility statement that's publicly available. So it needs to be on your website, easily findable on your website or on your application. And it has to cover certain information of what accessibility compliances you have reached and what you haven't reached and why, and what your plan is to reach those compliances. And again, AHEAD actually has a short digital course that can guide you through how to develop a web accessibility statement and what needs to be covered within that. Leigheen, can we just go back to the previous slide for a sec there? Perfect, thanks, Emil. So the other big thing that you have to have, as well as your accessibility statement, is a clear complaints or feedback process. This can be as simple as simply having an email address on your website that you're listing as this is the person or department to approach with any complaints or feedback on the website accessibility or on the accessibility of the app. So it's important to have those two things, your accessibility statement and what's the feedback process for when we're not getting things quite right. Another big thing with the Web Accessibility Directive is that you provide alternatives for access. So for example, if you have podcasts on your website, you need to have transcripts or Word document versions of that so that any deaf users can still access that information. Equally, if you have an infographic, it's important that you have a Word document or a text-only version of that infographic. So that people can access that. So we're ready for the next one now, Leigheen. Perfect, thank you. So important things for the Web Accessibility Directive compliance that you need to hit. Any images on your website, you need to have alternative text descriptions on your images. I'm going to cover that in a little bit of more detail later on in the presentation. If you're using icons on your website, don't use them by themselves because those can actually confuse people who are from different backgrounds or different generations. For example, quite a classic one is that we see a floppy disk icon as a save across a lot of different places. And this can be confusing if you've actually grown up before floppy disks were a thing. Equally now, we have the icon for an email is often a letter. And so people can be not so familiar with those. If you are using icons, it's just important that you use text as well. So if you're using a magnifying glass to show that you can search with this search bar, just add the word search as well. It's great to use icons. They can be very helpful for people with cognitive disabilities, for people with language barriers, for people with intellectual disabilities, but it's just important to have the words as well to just explain what does this icon do. There are a lot of different compliances around your navigation on your website and app that I'm not going to go through in too much detail, but again, our guidance with Katie Ridge does cover this. A big thing that you can do that's really helpful for all users is make it that you can personally adapt the text size and background color of the website. I've shown on AHEAD's website here, we have a plugin that allows users to change their background color and their text size. There are many different plugins like this available, so I'd really encourage you to explore those. It's a really helpful, simple thing that you can do to make your website more accessible. Many of you here are working within recruitment. A very important thing, if you do have your own web platform that candidates have to go on to make their job application, either uploading documents or if you do have a built-in application form, you need to make sure that that application form is keyboard accessible for any blind candidates that may be using a screen reader, or equally people with certain physical disabilities that may have limited use of their hands. So really important to make sure your form and your website is keyboard accessible. How do we do that? We need to use labels with our form fields. This is a technical aspect that the likes of Google Forms are compliant with. If you have a bespoke platform, it's something that you might need to talk to your web developers about and just check that it is compliant and that it is usable with a screen reader and is keyboard accessible for all users. I'd also say for any forms that you have candidates filling in, be mindful if you have time limits for candidates to enter information, give them as long as you possibly can. You don't want to inadvertently create a barrier for people if it's not necessary. I would say if you don't have a reason for the time limit, I wouldn't include one. If there is a reason, be it a security reason or whatever else, try to give them as long for each answer or for each page, however you have it set up, try to give them as long as you can. So you're not creating a barrier for, say, people with cognitive disabilities or any other disabilities or executive function difficulties. So perfect. I think we're about ready to hand over to Leigheen, who is going to show you how to make your Word documents accessible, which is great. So Leigheen, if you want to take it from here.
Yep, I'm just going to turn on my video. Hello again. So I am going to demonstrate an accessible Word document that I had prepared, and I'm going to show you how the various different measures have been put in place to make it as accessible as possible. So I'm just going to stop my share and then restart it with the Word document. Now, Word document, escape, do, perfect. I don't like sharing screen, so that is the most nerve-wracking part of this, which I'd say is a bit unusual. But here we have a document, and it is the job description for our digital media and e-learning officer, which is a post we currently have open in Ahead. And I'm going to talk through the elements of making an accessible Word document, and I'm going to go through everything on the slide. So the first thing is the accessibility checker, and I haven't actually done this in advance. So you hit review and then check accessibility, and then the first one is check accessibility, and fortunately we aren't embarrassed here. It says there are no accessibility issues found on the first glance. The accessibility checker doesn't catch everything, but it is a good way to kind of get that reassurance once you're done your own accessibility checks that you've done a good job and you haven't missed bits of alt text, which Jess will explain a bit later. So I just saw the chat, that's why I'm laughing. So the design, Jess will also talk about the design in more detail, but you can see that we chose sans serif font, which is a font without embellishments on each letter to make it easily legible. And we chose dark colors on the normal background, the white standard background. Some people with dyslexia find, and other print-based disabilities find looking at things with such a high contrast as white background and black text that they struggle to actually read. They sometimes, it exacerbates the issues that are already there. So what I recommend is, for things like presentations, have like a light gray background as we have, and then the standard black text. And then for documents, what I do, I have dyslexia myself, is I just dim my screen when I'm not doing it right now, but I don't have to read any of this, so it's fine. But yes, color choice and font, that is done. Images all have to include alt text, and ideally Jess will describe alt text and how you add it. There's no images on here, but ideally when you are putting in an image, you put it in line with the text. So when you're adding it, it doesn't float, and that means the screen reader knows to read the alt text at the appropriate time rather than before everything else or at the very end of the document. So you can see here, this is a link, and I'm pointing it out because you can see that we know exactly what the link will do. And that's very important for people with anxiety, but also for screen readers that pull out links and present them all at the bottom. if we said click here and then even afterwards to discover a head's AT tool, that's not as helpful, because the only thing you read back when you scan, or the only thing that a screen reader might read, is click here, click here, click here, more info here. So they don't actually know what's going to happen when they follow it in that case, and most likely they won't go through them all. Heading and styles consistency is my favorite one. So as you can see here, we have some headings in navy. The title is in navy and the headings are in navy in a different font. And then there's kind of even small ones in bold and black. The reason it's important to do this, so like to have a structure with your headings and styles consistent, is for one, it looks better, but also when you use styles, as we have here, to create, there we are, heading 2, to create this, it makes the very first point on the slide on including a table of contents very easy to do, because what happens is you can view the navigation pane and you can see all of your headings here. That's quite small. I'll see if I can make that larger. Nope, doesn't like that. But you can see all of your headings here. And that means that when you decide at the end of making your document to put in a table of contents, we haven't in this document because it's very short, it's only 3 pages. You can do so by just saying insert. Oh, no, didn't like that. Insert table, and then below the table, there should be a table of contents. They're always changing things on newfangled what's it called, technology. But here we have a contents, and the reason you would provide contents or a table of contents at the beginning of a document is if it's particularly long, most people won't want to read diligently through the first page, second page, and so on through to the end. They'll probably only want to look for bits that are relevant to them. And then, of course, people with disabilities are likely to also use this pattern because, you know, people don't have as much time nowadays as they used to, I'm told. But it's also helpful for people with dyslexia, for not having to read the entire document, to only be able to dip in and out where they actually need to find relevant information. And finally, it's helpful for people with anxiety to know, okay, this is what I can expect, and this is where I can find out the glossary of used terms before I start, because often if you include a glossary at the very end of a document, which is a great thing to do if you use specialized language or even just a lot of jargon, is you go through the document not knowing the jargon and kind of getting increasingly more bewildered. So I'd recommend including the glossary in the table of contents. Sorry, I'm rushing through this, but that is most of it. Yeah, so heading, styles, and consistency, and that naturally lends to include a table of documents. The next slide I will share is on PDF documents from Word documents. And the final thing I wanted to say is the thing about headings and consistency is it also aids you in making sure your message is coherent and making sure that your content is laid out in a way that is intuitive to read and to therefore be understood more easily. All right, so I'm going to stop that share once I actually do the next slide. Yes, right. So if you wanted to share this document as a PDF, which we don't recommend, we recommend Word documents, the best way to do it is not to use print or export, because in some earlier versions of Word, they don't do the tagging as necessary. But if you do save as, choose where you would like your document, and I'll choose downloads. And then you choose the PDF type, and you make sure your title is as you want it. and you go for the optimize for standard publishing online and printing. So that is a bit more storage, but it basically ensures the text is legible, and no matter how, whether it's online or printed. And then the most important thing is that you remember to go to options and you click PDF/A compliant. The A stands for accessibility. And then you go through and you make sure page range all, okay, publish what, the document. And then you have to click the tick mark on create bookmarks using headings. And this will basically ensure that all the work you did in making your headings consistent and using styles will be carried through, and that someone with a screen reader reaps the benefit of you doing that and be able to navigate themselves by selecting what's relevant to them at the time. Then you click OK, save as normal, and I can stop the demo. Oh, it's still saving, but that's fine. Oh, no, didn't like that. But that's fine, I think, because I can share the slides still while that is doing its thing. Okay, grand. Whew. Share screen. And unlocking communications read only. And from current slide. Okay, is that working?
Please, yeah, perfect.
So I'll just run through what I went through in the demo there. I kind of went in reverse order. So first we showed the accessibility checker, which is kind of a last defense against inaccessibility. Then I talked about design. So Jess will go through this in much more detail, but effectively what you want is for the font to be legible, so sans serif, and you want the color choice to be suitable, so high contrast colors, but preferably not, if it's going to be on screens, white, like stark white on black. Images and alt text, again, Jess will go into this in more detail, but if you have images, it's vital that you add alternative text to them, even in a document, so that people using screen readers or people with visual impairments can understand what you're illustrating and can access the document as well as anyone else can. And again, images, if you place them in line in a document, it will automatically make the read order of your document more sensible. Links must be embedded with descriptive labels, again, for people with perhaps anxiety or with screen readers. Headings and style consistency, which makes the table of contents much easier, but is also in and of itself helpful. Structured messaging and plain English. Plain English I didn't really get into, but I'll talk about that more in emails. And the last thing here is you can see Word document accessibility guidelines. We have a web page on the allyship which has Word accessibility guidelines. We also have some on other spots in the website, but that's the most recently updated one. So I'd recommend that one, even though it's aimed at students, for being a good place to start. Well, no, actually being a thorough place to get everything you need on Word docs accessibility as current. They'll probably bring out a new one, but anyway. And then PDFs are done, and now we are on to Jess, and I will stop the share. Oh yeah, PDF. Oh no, sorry. Thought we were on to Jess, but I'm not out of the woods just yet. So disclosure and increasing the visibility of disability. So as Jess said at the start, it's very important, if you want to reach a wide audience of people, that you include people with disability in that. Because like Jess said, we make up at least 1 in 7 of the Irish population. But beyond that, over 3 in 4 of the disabled students registered their disability in HEIs have an invisible disability. So if we're to take this as being broadly representative of people with disabilities in general, we can say that it's hard to identify a disabled person by just looking at them, because at least, I think it was 77.8% of people presented that the the disability that most affected their life was actually invisible. So with that, we have to talk about disclosure, because if you're going to be representing people with disability in your organization and in your recruitment, that will probably require someone to disclose their disability if that's to make it happen. But first and foremost, I'd like to say that disabled employees are not obligated to disclose to you. If you don't invite them to share their accommodations or create an environment of openness or otherwise encourage disclosure, it's very likely they will fear prejudice. And I've linked here a report on employer attitudes to hiring graduates with disabilities, where just over half said that if someone did not disclose their disability at the recruitment stage before the offer was made, it would be a betrayal of trust, which I think is a bit extreme, given the actual amount of unemployment there is in the disability community. So I'd just like to reiterate that, you know, it's a complicated issue because you want to have people in your organization who are comfortable with it represent the disabled community and show that you're progressive and that you have the EDI, the equality, diversity, inclusion message there, and you include disability as a marginalized group. However, if someone is comfortable with you knowing that, say, they are disabled, you can't, or you shouldn't at least, assume that they are in a position where they're comfortable with the entire company and other people in the publications knowing. So that's one thing. But there are a number of things that you can do to actually encourage disclosure. So hopefully, is that showing that slide? Yeah, cool. So I have, again, another link, and this is encouraging and fostering a safe place for disclosure. And it's also on the allyship, so aimed primarily at students. But the content is broadly applicable because there's not really much of a difference between like how someone would feel coming out to a workplace as how someone would feel coming out to a lecturer. It's a similar kind of vibe of, oh dear, this person has authority over me and there are consequences. But the first thing you can do is what you're doing now, which is embedding accessible practices in your systems, especially for communications and recruitment. So more detail on that is on your socials, including alternative text, and using camel case hashtags, and just generally showing that it's something you put into place on your daily work. And then increase the visibility of disability culture in your organization. This might involve training people up to use the Just a Minute or JAM card, which is about, it's a credit card sized white card, yeah, with a JAM and Just a Minute written underneath it. And it's for people to produce on public transport, but it's also in some universities and some companies now. And the idea is once you show the card, the person who you're dealing with knows to kind of take a deep breath and give you more time to do whatever it is you're doing, or to be cognizant that, you know, you're not I'm trying to find a way to phrase this. You're not stalling them. You're just going to be moving a little quicker, a little slower, or you're less coordinated. Like I have dyspraxia as well. So I have my JAM card basically pinned to me anytime I go to Aldi or Lidl, because when you go to the line, there's just a mad rush when you get to the top trying to pack away your things. So they actually know me in the local Aldi as the one who holds up the queue, which is unfortunate, but is what it is. And then the third point is to continuously engage in training. And then critically, it's to accept feedback, but to also action it. So if you encourage someone to give their accessibility needs to an accessibility contact ahead of an event, then you also have to follow through. If that person says, I need accessible information on accessible transport to your location, you have to make sure you give the information or the support that is required. And now I'll just check, but I think, yeah, the next one is accessible design. So, whew.
Hi there, so just bear with me while I share my screen. That was really insightful, Elaine. Perfect.
I think there was already a few kind of comments in the chat there. Yeah, it's great. So Leighton, you can probably catch up in the chat while Jess is doing her thing now.
Perfect. It's always nice
Sounds
to get questions. So one of the biggest things that I always think about for design for social media in particular is font size. I would always recommend have the font size be as big as you can get away with, basically, both because it grabs attention, particularly with social media. It's so busy. Our attention spans are always getting smaller and smaller. So you really want to kind of catch the eye, catch people's attention, but also for legibility. The bigger the font size, the more people are going to be able to access that information. So I would say always be mindful of your font size. For an image for social media, I personally would never go beyond 12-point font, but I would very rarely actually use font that's that small, to be honest. Leighton referred earlier to sans serif versus serif fonts. You can see here that I've actually used a serif font there as an example. So serif fonts have little wings at the ends of each letter. It doesn't look so bad here, but the smaller the text is, because of those little wings, they can actually encroach on each other and it just blurs the words a little bit. It makes it harder to distinguish between letters. So it can create issues for anyone who is colorblind and can't distinguish easily between the font color and the background color. Anyone who's dyslexic, it can exacerbate the words kind of jumbling together. Anyone with any kind of visual impairments, it can make it harder to read, and just the general population as well. Small serif fonts like we would traditionally get in newspapers is quite difficult for many of us to read. So I would say err on the side of caution, try to use sans serif fonts like Calibri or Arial or Verdana. So any kind of sans serif font I would always opt for, unless you're using a huge font size and you particularly want to have a difference in your fonts. But I would say err on the side of caution there. Then a really important thing for design is that for any text that you're using, you have a high color contrast between your text and your background color. You can use color checkers, like my favorite one is WAM, because it's compliant with the Web Accessibility Directive, which I referred to earlier. So that would be my favorite one. We are going to share the link to that in the email to you afterwards with the slides. But if you're not sure what I mean by this, or if you're not a designer, or what can often come up is where you have brand guidelines and you have to use your particular brand colors or your institution's colors. Sometimes that can come into a bit of a clash with this color contrast because you have to use certain colors. I would say if you are in that position, you can get around it by doing something similar to the image that I have here. So just drop bars or boxes or any kind of shape on top of your main color image that's either black or white, and use black or white text, so that you get to use your brand colors, but also make sure that it is still legible for anyone who has color blindness. And equally, the higher color contrast there is between your text and your background color helps us all to read. So if you do need to kind of work around your brand colors, this is a good way to do that. Another big thing for accessible design is avoid using too much text, both for cognitive overload. You don't want to have huge blocks of text. It can be difficult for anybody to read. But also it can kind of interfere with your legibility, because the more text you have, obviously, the smaller it's going to have to be. So I would try to reduce the text that you're using in images, certainly for social media. Just to talk quickly about alt text in context. So for this slide deck, the alt text description that I have on my lovely graphic here is very brief and simple. It simply says that this is an example of an image for social media that has a high color contrast between the text and the background color. The reason I've described it that way is that what this design specifically is not hugely relevant to this presentation. Whereas if I was actually posting this image on social media, my alt text description would go into more detail. So what I would say is that this image has a graphic of a laptop and a student sitting in front of it, that the image is a bright red, and the image contains text, and then I would list the text. So the biggest thing for alternative text descriptions is think of the context of what you're trying to communicate with the image, and then kind of follow that description across. So if you're using photography, again, you want to be careful if you're using text over the photography. You can see my photograph on the left here. I have a big wide background that's uninterrupted. That's fine to drop text over, both because it's easy for me to get a good color contrast between my text and the background color, but also because I have a big expanse of space here that's not interfering with the legibility of my text. There's nothing kind of, you know, interrupting the flow of the text that makes it harder to read. Whereas my image on the right here, you can see it's harder to read. There's technically a good color contrast between the color of the wall on the image and the text color, but because the text is interrupted with that window, it's difficult for people to read. And if you had dyslexia, if you are colorblind, if you have visual impairments, it just makes that very, very difficult to read. So again, a way that you can kind of get around that, if you do need to use a particular photograph, that might be a group shot or something, or if it's a picture with a building, or you're just tied to a particular photograph that does have a busy background, what you can do is, as I mentioned with the previous graphic, add a square or any other shape that has a sufficient color contrast with your text, and just make sure that you're not interrupting with the background. And so in that way, you're kind of making sure that that text is legible. So that is a good fix. Again, for alternative text for this, so if this was a full advertisement, I would describe it. You want to balance describing as much as you can while also not overloading the person using the screen reader. If you think a person accessing information with a screen reader is already having to digest all of the information in the same way, so you want to not have it be too long or too detailed that it's actually going to put them at more of a disadvantage of having to kind of cognitively process more information. So for something like this, the description that I would have, it's very simple. It's a close-up of a hand holding a camera, and there's an out of focus background of an office. And then I would describe my text as well. And that's kind of enough for this kind of context. So for videos, if you're using videos in any context, like I mentioned before, if you have it on your website or app, you need to have captions, but equally if you're using for social media, you need to have captions. Now, thankfully, a lot of the social media platforms actually make that quite easy for you to do. There are ways to auto generate your captions, so that's really great. So I'll go through that now. If I'm using a video that is under 10 minutes, which you would typically be doing for social media, I tend to use a website called Capwing, which I think Jade is going to drop the link in the chat. So I would tend to use Capwing for any video that's under 10 minutes to auto generate my captions. It's quite accurate. You might need to check your subtitles and just check, has it got anything wrong? But it's about 90% accurate, I would say, depending on how heavily accented the person speaking in the video may be. So yeah, it's very, very quick at auto-generating those subtitles as well. For longer videos that are beyond 10 minutes, I would use YouTube. It's similarly accurate, I would say about 90%. You still might want to check your subtitles and edit them a little bit, and I will show you how to do that now in a second. The only reason that I would use Capwing rather than YouTube is it's just a little bit quicker at generating them. YouTube can take, you know, kind of longer to generate those. Instagram stories, you can auto-generate captions, and TikTok equally. Many accounts now give you the option to auto-generate your captions. So just to show you what Capwing looks like, this is a screen grab of their kind of page when you go to upload a video. So very simply what you do, you would choose your video that you're going to upload. You can see that you would click to upload there, or you can paste a video URL in directly, and then you have just a very easy identifiable button there at the top, click subtitles. You would then click auto generate subtitles. It's very, very quick. For a video that's, like I say, under 10 minutes, it only takes 2 to 3 minutes to actually generate those captions, which is fantastic, especially for those of us working in social media. We need things to be quick. So that's why I would recommend Capwing. If you have a Google account or a Facebook account, you can sign in directly using those, which again is just kind of handy. So for YouTube, again, if you're uploading a video, it's very simple. Once you've kind of entered your initial details, the very next screen, you have this option, add subtitles. Once you click add there, it's going to auto generate those for you once you've kind of gone through the process and uploaded the video, which is great. I'm going to kill my share now and just show you how you would then edit those subtitles, but it's very kind of intuitive and easy to use. So I'm just going to stop my share real quick.
I might just remind people while you're doing that, Jess, if
Sure.
they have any questions, they pop them into the Q&A box, and there is some chat going on, but we will have time for Q&A, specific Q&As at the end, so please do engage with the chat box, or sorry, the Q&A box. Yeah, that would be great, so we can keep track of the questions.
Yeah, please do. We're very kind of happy to have questions. So like I said, this is us here on YouTube. You can see I've popped in my initial details. You just click next, you do your add subtitles, it'll start generating those for you. Then if you were to have done that, your subtitles are up and you notice there's just some little kind of issues with it. Simple, you just click your edit video here. It's just going to load for me. Click subtitles here on the left, click into edit and do your thing there. It's very easy to kind of go through. So perfect. I'm back here to my screen. Perfect. So for Instagram stories, if you're uploading a video and it has audio and you want to caption it, what you would do is you just click this little graphic of the smiley face here, and you'll get all these different options for, you may be familiar with already, like location, mention, etc. So there is actually an auto captions option here, which I've identified for you. As soon as you click that, it's very, very quick and it'll give you captions. The standard is that the captions will be in white. So again, always thinking about color contrast. If, for example, I was doing an Instagram story of myself speaking here, I would not want my text to be white because you can see, obviously, my background is quite pale. So what I would select is I would just click the captions and it'll give you the option to change the font, change the size and change the color. So I would change my color to black in this kind of context. Again, similarly to when I went through the photographs with you, if you are putting an Instagram story up of someone speaking like I am now, you would want to try to have sufficient space that you can put the captions somewhere where they're not going to be interrupted by background details, again, so that they are legible for your audience. But it's great that they do have that auto captions feature. You can also edit them. So again, it's just a case of you've clicked your caption button, it's done the captions, just click the text again and it'll give you the option to edit them in those different ways. TikTok have introduced auto captions. Some users currently have them. They are still in the midst of the rollout, so some of you may not. Check in your profile settings, go into accessibility. You will either have the option to add captions to all videos or you won't, unfortunately. If you don't, what I would say is a good workaround, and what I personally do, is I would caption it on Instagram there, download the video and upload that to TikTok, and it'll have the captions on the file. But if you do have captions on your TikTok, obviously that's better for you. So would encourage you to check. Another great thing that TikTok has is it does have text to speech. So if any of you are on TikTok and you've heard that kind of robotic voice that's become a bit of a meme now, that's text to speech. So when you actually add speech, or when you actually add text of any kind to a TikTok video, if you just click on that, you'll see these options come up, and one of them is text to speech. I would encourage you to use that, because if you do have any blind or visually impaired users on the TikTok, it'll read out the content to them. So really, really great feature to use. So then when you're ready to post on your social media, it's important to make sure that your hashtags are in camel case. So what I mean by that is, if you think of the humps of a camel, those are your capital letters. So you want each new word to have a capital letter, as I've indicated there. So like this, with both new words having a capital letter and not all in sentence case. If it's in sentence case, it'll read out quite confusingly to a screen reader, but also if you're not familiar with certain words or terms, or if say you have a plural of a word, it can just cause confusion if you have quite a long hashtag for anybody to distinguish what are the individual words here, what's actually being said. It can be difficult to understand. So I'd always encourage using camel case for any of your hashtags. Be very careful on social media with emojis. It's great to use them, and I think it makes your brand very kind of approachable and friendly. It can be good to kind of break up quite a corporate tone, but you don't want to use too many. And the reason for that is you might not always know how the screen reader is going to read them out. So for example, at the minute, it's quite popular to post about red flags that you might have about a certain thing. That will often be read out as a screen reader flag on poll. And so if you have that repeated, that person using the screen reader is just hearing flag on poll, flag on poll, flag on poll. It's not telling them that the flag is red. So what is being communicated is not making sense to them. So yeah, I would just always be careful with emojis. Don't use too many. And I would say definitely don't use loads, interrupting text, as I've indicated here with this example post on the right from SciSavers, because it's very confusing. We'll often see this with a meme where there's clapping emojis between words. It's just very confusing for someone using a screen reader to understand. So just be careful with your emojis. I would always put them at the end of the text on my post to encourage that people will be able to access the information. But also say for your social media messaging, it's important to be clear, to give clear instructions about how to apply for the job or where they can go for more information. Don't assume that they'll kind of implicitly understand just from the context. Try to always be clear as you kind of can. The big thing that we've said quite a few times now is making sure that you add your alternative text. The social media platforms do all have the ability for you to add your alternative text. So on Twitter, as soon as you're adding an image, you'll see the option to add a description. If alt text has been added to an image, an alt badge appears, as you can see in my post here on the right. So a little black alt badge shows on the image if you do have alt text. You can actually click that and read, excuse me, you can actually click that badge and it'll show a little pop-up window that shows the alt text description for that image. So a really good way to learn what should I describe, how much should I describe, this kind of thing, is actually to read how are other people doing it. I'd welcome you to look at Ahead Ireland's alt text and how we do it. We're Ahead Ireland on all the social media platforms. But it's really great that Twitter now has this feature that you can see other people's alt text, because like I say, it can kind of create that kind of learning opportunity for you if this is something that's completely new to you. So like I say, to add your alternative text, you'll see the option to add description as soon as you're adding an image there, and then you can write what you want to write. On Facebook, you'll actually need to click edit, and then you'll see the alt text option come up. On LinkedIn, as soon as you add an image, the option to add alt text will show up underneath the picture with the kind of other options. So you would click in there and add your description. For Instagram, to add alt text, you have to click advanced settings and then write alt text comes up. And so you would add it into the box there. Perfect. So I'm just going to hand over now to Leigheen to take you through accessible emails.
And I will at this point just say there is just over 5 minutes left. So we are hoping to finish up at 12:35. So it's 12:28 now. So if that's okay, so we have time for Q&A.
Okay, so we'll have Q&A afterwards. Good. I was like, there are too many questions to address in 3 minutes. But on accessible emails, so the main point that I want to drive home here is to proactively ask for accessibility requirements at each stage of recruitment. So when I gave the disclosure workshop to graduates at Building the Future, I was telling to them that what I would personally do is bring it up when it becomes relevant. So if I had an interview accommodation of needing questions in advance or needing it to be in an accessible room, then I would make that known at the stage when I'm invited to interview. But if it was before then that my application form, I couldn't read it because it was online and it didn't have the correct markings for my screen reader for me to be able to actually respond, then obviously I'd have to email them before that point. But if you actually encourage people each time that you contact them about this, just one line at the end, it shows that you're actually willing and able to accommodate them. It's a really strong way to actively show your principles. Then the other thing is what we mentioned before in documents. So it's very good to have a structure and clarity and plain English. There's a readability checker that I forgot to actually give Jade the link for, but I'll put it in. And it basically tells you when your sentences are too long, which is generally what my problem is, or when you're using kind of verbose vocabulary or inaccessible words. Like it basically tells you how your text is coming across for someone who's reading it for the first time, rather than for someone who already has expertise in the area. So I'll share that link. In your signature, it's important to include, first of all, your name and then your job title. Pronouns are kind of helpful if you want them. But also at the very bottom, in a head, we have like a confidentiality statement, but instead of that, you might have that as well, but you can have something along the lines of, if you're corresponding about an event, if you have accessibility requirements, please contact, and then preferably an email with a name to it. But if you have an EORG, like an employer resource group, you might say, please contact Sinead Kelly, who is the EORG chairperson, at this email, which might be accessibility@mycompany.org. But the most important thing is that you proactively ask and kind of encourage feedback. Then things that we've said before, but are good to reiterate, links should be embedded with descriptive labels. So screen readers sometimes pull out all of the links in an email, and then read them out at the end. So if every link says click here or more information, that means they won't be able to discern what will happen when they click the link, and most likely they probably won't go through them all. It's also helpful if you're scanning through an email and you see the bits underlined and in blue have the actual title of the page they're going to, because it just gives you immediate context, not having to kind of parse together the paragraph before to find what you're looking for. And then, as Jess was saying, alt text is very important, and you should include it on any images, even in an email. And if embedding or linking to videos, they should be captioned as well. All right, I think that is all on that. So it's the rapid recap now. and links. I'll just read out what it says and add some notes if I have any. So use descriptive hyperlinks such as read our report on employer attitudes to disability, not click here or learn more or read more. Use plain English and explain any specialized terms or acronyms. Sometimes having a glossary is very helpful. Ensure you have high color contrast between text and backgrounds. If you're doing a presentation, it's better to have kind of a gray or a pastel background than pure white. But in documents, people can just dim their own screens. If you're using images in any context, add alt text descriptions. If you're using videos in any context, ensure they're captioned. If you're using hashtags, use hashtag camel case or capitalize the first letter of each new word. And then I'd say the main point of the last bit is invite feedback and critically action it. So I have no doubt that you guys will, because you're here and you're putting in the effort to learn. So it's great to see such a huge engagement, and it's kind of humbling in a way, I guess. But it's all for naught if you don't actually listen to the people on the ground who need you to accommodate them once they're there. So you can recruit them, but once they're there, you have to still look after them or else.
I love that point, Leighine. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Leighine and Jessica. Like, you both have been, as I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, accessibility gurus here in ahead. I've even learned something new. And I suppose, it's really important, today might be the first time people have actually gone, camel case, what's that? Headings? There's such a thing as table of contents, and that's how you do them. I remember one of our own team members, I won't even mention their name, but they were manually typing their table of contents doing their studies in college, and it was just like,
I did that as
blew
well.
their mind when they were like, I could have just done headings, and I could have, it would have done it like this. And they just spend days doing their tables of content. But yeah, you did it as well, Jess.
Yeah, and like we said, it makes it so much quicker that if you change anything, it just carries it across. Whereas if you're doing it manually, it actually takes more time. And I think that's a really important takeaway message I'd love you to come away with today, is actually these things save you and your candidates and your audience time. They're not, sometimes we can hear accessibility and it sounds like all this extra work I have to do, or all these. Once it becomes part of your workflow, it doesn't take you any longer and it's more beneficial to everybody. So definitely that would be a big takeaway I'd love you to come away with today.
Brilliant. So we do have a couple of questions that came in through the chat box there. So the first question was, do you have any accessibility tips on posting on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so for LinkedIn, as with the others, big one is always add your alt text description. Like I said, for LinkedIn, it's quite intuitive. As soon as you go to add an image, it's shown up right underneath there with your other options that you add an alt text description. So I'd encourage you to do that. If you're using hashtags, make sure you're doing camel case. So you're capitalizing the first letter of each word. I know for social media managers, sometimes this can make you a little bit nervous. Is this the same as the hashtag that's coming up for me, where it's all in sentence case? The answer is yes. The app is treating it the same. So you're making it more accessible and it's not taken away from your reach or anything like that. And again, making sure that if you're uploading a video on LinkedIn, that it is captioned.
So actually, just as you mentioned there about camel case, Jess, an anonymous person put in the Q&A box, could you explain that again, but put an example maybe in the chat? I mean, one good example I always think of is that years ago I was watching a documentary talking about how they started making the motorways in England, right? And I suppose they were making the signs for these brand new motorways, and they have to judge the distance in which drivers could actually, I suppose, see the next exit, because if you're going 100 miles an hour, you need to read kind of so far in advance. So they were saying that it wasn't actually useful to actually capitalize the name of the town or the next exit where they were going to, because when you're writing, people recognize words based on the shape of the letters. you know, so that's why you do see kind of on motorway signs that, you know, if in England, I don't know about Ireland, I haven't actually looked that hard, but where they've actually kind of made a point of, like Manchester, for example, it's a capital N and small letters, but just in bigger font, because people will recognize the shape of Manchester rather than it all being in caps, you know. And the similar principle can apply there. So it's not just about screen readers reading out separate words, but it's actually that you can recognize the word quicker. You know, even for a person who doesn't have any accessibility requirements are able to read out the hashtag, they're able to spot it a lot quicker.
Yeah,
So
perfect. And Jade, that is a good example there of camel case. I saw another question in the chat box. Somebody asked, can alt text only be seen by people using a screen reader? So like I said with Twitter there, the answer is now no. So I'm actually going to quickly share my screen and demonstrate this. So I have a post here ready to go. I have an image here. You can see that as soon as you've added an image, the option comes up to add description here. So I'm going to go purple image with a graphic of a key and text, accessible communications, hashtag WAMinar. Okay, that's perfect for your kind of alt text for this context. So that is fine. And then I'm going to post. So save and tweet. Perfect. Now we've tweeted it. You can see this little black alt badge here on Twitter. Click that and you can see anybody's alt text. So this is actually a great thing that Twitter has done, because like I said, if you look and you see that alt badge, I would encourage you to click it and read, how are other people doing their alt text descriptions? What are they including? What kind of things do they emphasize? It's a really good way for you to learn how to do it if it's something that you're not familiar with. So on Twitter, anybody can see whether you've added alt text or not, and anybody can read it, whether they use a screen reader or not. Currently on the other social media platforms, it's only people with screen readers who can read the alt text, and obviously also the person who has posted it. So for Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram, once you've added your alt text, you can still actually edit it as well.
One
I
thing
might just,
about alt text that we didn't touch on is when you're writing alt text, if you have a hashtag, that's grand, people can still read it. But if you have a link to something, you're better off putting that in the post, because the way the technology works for at least screen readers, but also I think just all alt text, is that it isn't advanced enough to actually have hyperlinks work. So you're better off just sticking to an image description and perhaps a hashtag.
Definitely. And the important thing as well is that you're trying to help this person as much as you can. You're not trying to overload them with information. So I will often put in my alt text info repeated in post or in tweet. If it's literally the same, like I have this information about my job posting and the image is just a visual way to grab attention, you don't have to list it out again. That's fine. Equally, if I had an image and it was quite a long list and quite a lot of information, sometimes it's better to say what your website is for more information, rather than having someone sit through a lot of the information. Just let them know where the information is. So it's all kind of context based. I did see another question in there about alternative text. Somebody said, is it good practice to add a description in your main post text? I would say no, because then you're not giving the person using a screen reader the option and the kind of control over getting that information that they have if it's in the alt text field. If it's in the alt text field, they can skip through it. They can ignore it. If they're listening to it again and it is just repeating the post text, they can go, click out of it. Whereas if you put it in the main post text, they're having to kind of sit through that. So I would recommend not to do that. It's better to use the apps as they're set up to do. And also because a huge thing, I really advocate using the alt text all the time, even if it is just info repeated in tweet or this is a descriptive image, is because the social media platforms pay attention to how often these accessibility features are used, and it encourages them to look into and to put time into developing other accessibility features, the more that we all use these things. So I would really, really advocate, don't put it in your main post, put it where it's supposed to be.
Great. I see the questions are actually flying in now. I think we could have done a whole webinar just specifically on alternative tech. I mean, it's important to know that this is not the only accessibility feature, like, you know, captions on your videos. And when we're talking about this, you know, it is very basic accessibility, but if you think that your company, or even when you're promoting, there's a lot of people from the public sector and higher ed here, but if you're promoting college courses even, or you're promoting a job, you know, you might have a testimonial from someone and it's not captioned, so therefore you're not reaching that audience. But if you've got images with text on them, you know, you don't have that color contrast, you don't have alt text. So all of that means that people with disabilities and accessibility needs can actually access that information. There is 2 questions here, but I don't know if we're going to get time. The first one is, where can we get the alt text icon to insert into a newsletter? I understand that that's kind of making sure the image itself has alternative text. It's not necessarily going to show up an icon, isn't that right?
Yeah, no, so that icon only shows for Twitter. That's something that they've automatically generated. So, and I wouldn't, I don't think it's necessary to kind of try to publicly promote it in that particular way, because again, the people benefiting from alt text obviously would not be able to see that icon. So I think it's more important making sure that you do these things and you cover all these bases. As Caroline said, the more of these things you do, the wider of an audience you're reaching. So I'd kind of concentrate on getting those kind of basics right first, rather than you know, how you kind of promote them, is what I would say there.
I think I understood that question a bit differently. I think that they're asking, how do you add alt text in an email, for example, rather than like, is there an indication of where you add it? So I'm going to look it up on Outbox now, because I only know how to do it on Gmail.
We might not have time, late.
Oh, okay.
No, if it's in most contexts, like PowerPoint, email, anything like that, usually if you do your kind of right click and you get options for images, there's usually going to be something in there called either add description, add caption, add alt text. So that's what I would kind of look for. If you're talking about MailChimp, again, once you've added an image in, if you click it again, it's coming up as add alternative description. I would say 9 times out of 10, if you're looking for any of these things, try clicking it again. Because like I said, for example, for Instagram, for the captions, that's how you edit them, etc. So always just try to click it, see if it comes up. If not, you can search, okay, how do I do it for this context?
Perfect, thank you. There is one last question, but I think it's probably not directly related to this webinar, just in relation to making graphs and charts accessible. I mean, that's a whole other topic in itself, and it is quite complicated in terms of making sure the reading order is correct, but also that it's kind of representing the graph in the most appropriate way. So we won't get time to answer that question today, if that's okay. So I would like to give a big thank you to Lahin and Jeff. You've been absolutely fantastic. I've even learned a little bit today myself, and I work with you guys every day. So yeah, no, you've been absolutely fantastic. Is there any kind of final words you would like to say to our attendees? We still have 100 people watching us, so it's brilliant.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, Lahin, you go first.
Okay, just the anonymous attendee. I have a link that I can send to that. So if you email me, I'll email you back the link, which goes into detail about how to write alt text that describes graphs and charts and shows the purpose of them without going into too much detail and overwhelming the person with irrelevant stuff. So that's that. And then otherwise, thank you all for coming. You've been wonderful. So bye.
Thanks, Emil. What I would say is I really, really want to hit this point. Like, these things can sound like, oh, it's extra work. And particularly, you know, I hear you. I'm a one-person communications team. I get that it sounds like these things are difficult and it can take a lot of time and all the rest of it. They absolutely don't. It's adding a few seconds each time to what you're doing. And for the people who need the information, who need these things to access your information, it's going to save them a whole lot of time. It's going to save you time having to send people alternative formats and alternative information. It's just all around a better way of communicating out your messages. And there are always workarounds. Think these things through of how can I do this in the most efficient way? Like I said, that workaround of caption it on Instagram first, download that, use that captioned video on your other platforms. There's always ways. Or for example, when I'm doing my alt text for an image like that on Twitter, because I can see it again, I'll copy and paste it and reuse it if I'm reusing that image again. So once you've done it once, just remember what you did, and there is always, you know, kind of faster ways to do it. And equally, you're trying to make sure people can access information. You're not trying to overwhelm them with information. So I'd always say be mindful of that. But these things don't take as long as they feel like they do. And also be forgiving of yourself. If you come away today and you are like, right, I'm going to concentrate on getting this one thing right for the next few weeks, then we'll look at this, then we'll look at this. That's way, way better than getting overwhelmed and not kind of changing anything. So I'd say try the +1 approach if that's what's most appropriate to you.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. And also thanks to Jade, who's right here beside me, but she's obviously kind of offline here, but she's been kind of sharing all the links. So Jade will send out, I suppose, a survey link. She's already posted it into the chat. Your feedback is really important to us because, you know, we want to make sure that we're, I suppose, having topics that are very relevant to what you are looking for, but also just to see how we're doing and how we can improve ourselves as well. So that's really important. We'll also send out the slides of this webinar, but also the links. So all the links that have been posted to the readability, all of that, the web accessibility, they'll be in one document where you can actually save and circulate amongst your colleagues. The recording might take a couple of weeks, just once we get it uploaded to YouTube. And of course, we're not going to put out anything on YouTube without having captions, and that does take time for us to make sure that they are kind of synced correctly and also kind of edited correctly as well. So do bear with us, but do keep checking back on the web page because we usually put the YouTube video embedded onto the actual web page where you have registered for today's webinar. So next month we are having our next webinar, topic to be confirmed. So please do, if you have any ideas, pop it into the evaluation at the very end. But thank you very much for watching. And also the last but not least is Karen, our captioner, who provided caption for us today. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.